I'm going to let Lisa tell you her story, and thank you very much for being here tonight, Lisa.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it, and it is an honor for me to be here. Thank you, and for everyone who is a veteran here, thank you for your service. My dad, Nino Marisi, was in the Army Air Corps in World War II. He passed away in 1998. He was an aerial gunnery instructor, and he was based in Las Vegas. And that's him when he was probably about 22 years old, I think, something like that. But he, as other members of the Greatest Generation, did not talk a lot about the war to their children, and like me. And so I learned a lot by writing this book, and I found out that Donald also didn't talk about the war to his children. So as I get into it a little bit more, I'll explain a little bit more about that, but you can change it. Thank you. This is the result of 11 years of research, hard work. Not sure if I was going to do it or be able to do it, but I learned a lot about myself. I discovered I had a lot of tenacity to put this together. And I'm just going to back up a little bit and tell you how it all started. You mentioned a little bit about what happened, but you can change it. This is Donald and Margery Storey, and they are the basis of this book. And for 6 long years during World War II, they were separated. And their only means of communication was through their letters. So they wrote, and they wrote often. The letters were their lifeline. It provided comfort in a time of uncertainty. She didn't know if he was coming back. He didn't know if he was coming back. This picture was taken when he was a midshipman at Annapolis. And the story goes that they knew each other from childhood, and they grew up in Mount Vernon together on the same street, but they didn't date when they became teenagers. But when he went down to Annapolis, he needed a date for a dance one night, and Marty's her nickname. Her regular name is Margery. Marty happened to be going to Mary Washington College in Virginia, and so he remembered that she was there, and he asked her for a date. And the rest is kind of, as they say, history. They fell in love. So what happened? How did the love letters get into the laundry basket that you mentioned? Years later, after these 5 years of 6 years of separation, the letters did get lost in a laundry basket. The reason I found them, you can change it, is I have a vintage business on the side. So I'm always ducking in and out of vintage stores and thrift stores, consignment shops and things like that, looking for things to resell. And my husband, Joe, and I have a condo on Cape Cod, and we were up there 11 years ago, and I went into an antique store in Dennisport in Cape Cod and was looking around, and I went down into the basement, and there across the room was a laundry basket, and on the laundry basket there was a sign that said World War II ephemera on the laundry basket. So I was curious, and I walked over to see what it was, and I looked into the laundry basket, and it was piled with all of these letters, not only letters and airmail envelopes, but photographs, discharge papers, ration stamps, all kinds of other things were in there. So I reached in and I pulled out one of the envelopes, saw that it was a love letter, started reading it, and started crying because it was just so full of hope and longing and sacrifice of him wanting to get back to her. So as we find out, Donald was not only fighting for his country in World War II, he was fighting to get back to Margery. And the book chronicles all of those steps, that took place as he fought and went to war and came home and went back to war. All of that is chronicled over the whole 6 years. So there's, I think you can change it now. This is one of the early dance cards, if you remember, if you ever used a dance card. But when Marty was going to Mary Washington College, they had the dance, April 25th, 1942. And you can change it, please. And could have been her first date. Could have been her first date with him. And one more time. And this is part of it, but these were all the guys that she danced with and all the nicknames that she had for him. But as you notice, she's got Don, Don, and Don on there 3 times, and she wished all her dances would be like that, and I'm assuming she was talking about her dances with Don. So that's just a little sidebar. The next picture is Donald when he was at Annapolis, and I guess we can stay on that for a little while because I'm going to just talk a little bit more about why I picked up these letters and why I decided to buy them from the store. I feel that it was my destiny to find these letters. I am a journalist. I worked at Channel 8 for 20 years, and I produced documentaries and specials. And my husband is proud to say that I was nominated for a lot of Emmys and received a lot of journalism awards. But it was really, I think, my journalism background that prompted me to want to do something more with the letters and to want to take them, because I knew that they were special, and I knew that I wanted to share the story with the world, basically, to preserve the legacy of not only Donald and Margery's love and romance, but also the legacy of Donald, who was serving in the war, and all of the events that occurred during that time. So I used my journalism skills to put the book together, but the first thing that I had to do was, gosh, how did these letters get where they got? And I had to find the family, and I didn't think they knew that they were basically lost in this antique store. So it took me 3 years to find the family. I tried myself on Facebook and everything. I could not find them. And I ended up finding somebody who was an amateur genealogist, and I hired him. And I said, it's going to take you a while to find them. He said, okay, well, give me a little bit of information. So I just gave him the names and whatever. And 24 hours later, he said, I found them. So I guess maybe he wasn't an amateur genealogist. Maybe he was professional. But it turned out that Margery was still alive. She was 91 at the time, and she was living in upstate New York with her son and her daughter-in-law. So I got a hold of them, and I said, I have these love letters of your parents. They had no idea how the love letters got into the antique store. We figured out later how they actually got into the antique store, but they, long story short, they gave me, I went up and I met them. They were in upstate New York at the time, and I met Margery. But at that point, she was starting with dementia, so her children didn't want her to know about the letters. They didn't want to upset her. But other than that, she was a very, very happy person. And I met her. I ended up getting the family's permission I told them what I wanted to do. I said, I don't want to do this to, become a famous author or anything like that. I want to do it for the reasons I told you, is because I want to preserve this. And I want to give this back to your family as a gift, because they had never read the letters. And this book is the first time they're actually reading the letters. So fast forward 11 years. It took me 3 years to find the family, and then it took me another 8 years to compile all of the letters, edit them, write all of the information leading up to the letters. If you ever wrote a letter to somebody in World War II, you know that they were censored, and you couldn't put any information about what was happening at the time. So I found the 3 ships that he was on. I found the logs for the 3 ships he was on and information about them. And I annotated all of the letters, put them all in order, annotated them to explain where he was at any given time while he was writing to Margery. And so the book is about 70% of the romance of them, and then the history. So you get the history and the romance kind of combined in the book. So it was quite an emotional journey for me to do this, and I ended up interviewing the 3 children that they eventually had. The book ends up going through when they dated, to when they had their first child, to when they reverse it, dated to married, and they had their first child, and then after he got out of the war, because he still served for a couple of years afterward. He started on a destroyer, and then he went to a submarine. He actually trained at the sub base here in Groton for 6 months, and then he ended up being the commanding officer of a landing tank ship. And that was the last ship he was on before he came home. And when they retired, I know I'm giving you the spoiler of the book, but when he retired, they lived in Fairfield for 40 years. And then when he left the service, they lived in Fairfield. He got a job, became a civilian. And then when they retired, they lived in Cape Cod for another 20 years. And that's how the letters got up there in Cape Cod. So I just want to check, make sure I'm hitting everything here. So the letters were written between 1941 and 1947. Are there any questions so far? Do you have any questions? No? Okay.
Just how did the letters, where did they move and they were left in a box or something, or?
Yeah, so what happened was Donald passed away, and the family had an estate sale up on the Cape, and they inadvertently got into the estate sale. And the owner of the antique store bought them. And it's funny because when I found these letters and I knew how special they were, I went to the store owner and I said, "Do you know what you have here?" And she had no interest in them at all. So I am pretty much convinced that if I did not find these letters, they would have been lost forever. So to me, it's an honor to be able to do this and to give this gift, as I said, this gift back to their family and to their children and their grandchildren, and now they have great-grandchildren. So it's changed the course of my life. I was always a behind-the-scenes person. I was a producer, and now I'm in front of all you talking about the book. So it's definitely different for me to be doing this. But again, it's an honor. The book, you had mentioned, the book gives you, just like with those letters that you have, a glimpse into not only history, but into the culture of the 40s and what was happening with movies. And you said Betty Grable. I think he mentioned Betty Grable, too, in the book. And it also gives you kind of a window into history, into all of the important events that happened, like Hitler's suicide and the bombing of Hiroshima and Mussolini. He talks about all of that in the book. And so that's pretty much, let's see. Oh, I wanted to change the slide and go to a nice picture of Marty when they got married. She was beautiful. And then the next one is a portrait of Marty. There's a lot of points in the book where he's bugging her for a picture, and she's kind of not sending her a photo of herself. And there was a famous portrait studio. Does anybody know Backrack Portrait Studio? Back in the day, they did the most famous portraits in the world, and down in the corner there, she had her photo taken by Backrack. She finally gave it to him, so he was very happy. I mentioned they got married, and then the next letter, or the next slide, shows one of the letters. There were 8 letters that Marty sent to Donald. There were the only 8 letters that survived. And this is one of the letters that she sent to him that told him she was pregnant with their first child. And of course, since he was out at sea, he did not receive this news for months, 2 or 3 months at least, before he knew. He actually was writing her a letter the night she was writing him the letter telling him she was pregnant. And when she passed away in 2017, her interment ceremony was on the Cape, and I read this letter to the family. And her daughter at the time was in her 70s, so you can say that there was not a dry eye in the house, because it was just so poignant, that she would be now seeing this letter and hearing this letter, which she had never seen before, about her. And the next slide is Marty when she worked at Texaco. And this was right when she was pregnant, so she was still working when she was pregnant. She was pretty much of a go-getter. She had a lot of jobs as a secretary, and that was the day that she was hired, that she got the job. They did a whole spread on her in Texaco magazine. And the next slide is Marty, and this is Marcy. This was her daughter, and Donald in the book refers to her, and I don't know why, as T-Nook. I have no idea. I was trying to make out his writing, but he refers to her as T-Nook. So if you're reading the book and he's talking about T-Nook, that's who he's talking about. And the next slide is Donald with her. So he was able to get home and visit on occasion. The next slide is one of Donald's letters to Marty, and this is a significant one because this is the one where he tells her that the war's over. So it's August 12, 1945, and the next slide is the rest of that letter. And he's telling her how excited he is about the war ending. Of course, little did he know he was still going to be in service for a couple more years. The next slide is them later in life when they were on Cape Cod. And then the next slide is when I went to visit them up in upstate New York. So this was Marty at 91, and the woman on the left is Vicky, her daughter-in-law, and then Don Jr. is in the middle. And the next slide is their children. So there's Don Jr., and this is little T-Nook in the middle, and then Chris is the youngest, and this is a picture I also took at her interment ceremony. And then the next slide, this is in the book. This is, I got a little poetic in the beginning of the book, and that's where she was buried, and that's her great-grandchild's hand with the flowers. And then the next slide is the book. And then if there's time, I'll just read a little bit. Okay. So the Carbonero had 2 war patrols, and she was, her war patrols were basically taking out the rest of the Japanese fleet.
So he might have made a war patrol or 2.
Yeah, he did 2 war patrols on the Carbonero. So she went to Subic Bay, and then she went, September 22nd, 1945, the sub arrived at Seattle for service on the West Coast. And then that was the post-war service. So that's where it was right around that time.
He was off it by then, though, right? Because on
No.
the LST in August at the surrender?
He was
He was still on his
he was still on. So, yeah. There were a lot of letters that were missing. So by the onset of 46, the Carbonero had left the West Coast. And with the war over, Donald could finally tell Marty his location. A partial letter was dated January 31st, 1946, and the submarine was back at Subic Bay and was scheduled to leave to go to Shanghai for 6 months to support destroyers. And then it was supposed to arrive back at the States by July, but that got a little messed up. And then he remained on the Carbonero as an engineering officer until June 8th, 1946. And he was detached on June 25th. And then he went through transportation to Tokyo Bay. And then on July 9th, 1946, he became commanding officer of the LST 642.
Any
You're gonna be tested later.
Yeah.
When did he leave the Navy? What year?
He left. You're testing me here now. 1947. Yep.
Boy, he could have been, I wonder if he was ever able to call back for the Korean, when the Korean War started.
No, I don't. He was in the United States Naval Reserve,
Yeah, well, if he was in there, he could have gotten called back,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
but we don't know. That's all lost to history. So anyway, so the letter from the submarine on Thursday night, April 12th, 1945. Going back and forth, but that's okay. My dearest darling, I still cannot realize that my whole life rode away a few hours ago. I'm sure you will be waiting for me at the next port of call. There is just no other way, not a fair one at least. Darling, I hope the ride atop a suitcase wasn't too bad. No, it was unpleasant in more respects than one. And world, what have you done to us now? Writing to you is certainly not going to be any strain. Millions of things to ask you, tell you, and discuss with you are running through my head at this very instant. Above all, I want to tell you how very proud I was of the stiff upper lip you kept through the trial and tribulations. If you hadn't, I'm sure I would have done a little weeping myself. Darling, I love you with every corpuscle in my body. George and I stumbled slowly back after my life left, and not one word issued from the lips of either one of us. I couldn't talk, as the lungs in my throat made it feel as though it were about to give at the seams. All went as it was planned, and as it has only been a few hours since we said so long for a while, all I've done is stare into space and force a very untasty few mouthfuls down my gullet. Darling, one of the boys just stuck his head in the wardroom and said President Roosevelt is dead. If so, it will certainly be a terrific loss to the United States and the whole world. Looks like your dad was right when he said Truman would finish out the fourth term. That is not to my liking at all. Guess it's true, as they just turned on the radio. April 12, 1945 is a bad day all around. Dearest, I'm so glad we had those 2 weeks in Key West. I thoroughly enjoyed every minute, but then I can't ever remember a minute of my life with you that I haven't enjoyed to the fullest. If two people were ever created for one another, I know well enough who they were, Margery and Donald. Wonder what you're doing right now. Wish you were running to the kitchen to try and save the burnt potatoes. Don't know why I must sit here and torture us both with memories like that, but it serves to ease the intense pain in my heart to put down on paper that which I treasure so deeply. Bet my boots Teanuck will be glad to see her mommy. I sort of suspect that mommy will be glad to see her too. Give the little stinker a big old hug and a kiss for me the moment you finish reading this. Tell her to return both with plenty of gusto, just as if she were I. Love of my life, until tomorrow at this time I'll bid you a fond adieu. I love you, dearest, above all else, and miss you terrifically already. Forever and ever yours, Donnie. And I have a lot of endnotes in the book that explain, for people who don't know, the young people, and it's very interesting how many young people want to read this book. One person told my husband that I want to know what true love is, right? So, and she was, I don't know, maybe 18 or 20 years old, something like that. So that's one of the letters. And then as we get further into the end of the war, when he was on the LST, I just wanted to read this one because it's one of my favorite letters. And it was at the point where he was on the LST and he kept getting delayed because of he had a tow going and all of that. And he was just having a lot of problems trying to get back. As his feelings of isolation from his family reached new heights, Donald sat down on Christmas Eve to write this poignant letter. In an encapsulation of their journey together, Donald described how their awkward beginning grew into a love so strong it simply could not die. The conclusion of this letter is sheer poetry. At this point, Margery was living with her parents in Danbury. They had moved from Mount Vernon. And this was written on Christmas Eve, 1946. My beloved, can't help but feel a little blue today in spite of what is called the holiday season. We have so many memories wrapped up in the last 4 Christmas days, darling. 4 years ago tonight, you took Buggy for what was to become one of the most beautiful walks in the world. I was certainly a heel that night, but though my methods were crude, the results were beautiful. Darling, I am so completely in love with you that I feel somehow that we really were made for one another. No snow here for Christmas. Hope you have a snowfall tonight. Hope you can remember every detail of Snooky's Christmas. I'm so anxious to hear about all her reactions. It will certainly be a very happy Christmas a year from now, our first in our own home. I know you are going to have a wonderful Christmas this year too, all of you. All Mother and Dad have talked about is spending Christmas with you and Little Bit. It would be such a happy day for them. All my love, my thoughts, my dreams, and my hopes are with you tonight, dearest. Could I but hop on a star and glide to where you are, if only for a moment of beauty and love that would cause all the separating miles and hours to pale and fade away. No stars for rent, sweetheart, but I'll be around in my own special dreamboat sometime between now and the dawn. A very Merry Christmas, darling, to you and our Snooky. I adore you, Donnie. That's it. I can do more if you want, but
Any
Any
other
questions?
questions that anybody has?
yes.
Did you get in touch with any of the reunion associations which ship crew often create after a ship is taken out?
Not yet.
The
Not yet.
destroyer one, yeah.
Yeah, I had their information,
Oh,
which is where I got all that, but no, I have not contacted them yet. No, it's been very crazy and hectic, but enjoyable.
In your vast research, did you go to that golden repository known as the internet, and
Of course.
did you get the history of any of the ships that way?
Yes, I did, but I made sure that it was the correct information. So, Wikipedia is not known for having all the correct information all the time. So I made sure that I backed up and double checked and made sure that all of that information was correct, especially regarding the ships. And so that the U.S. Navy has a giant book that has all of the ships in it. It's like an encyclopedia of naval ships. And they have it online now because the Navy condensed some of it and they put it online. So I got a lot of the information from there as well.